AMD just reported earnings and it nuked, but I still think it's a good time to buy. In their earnings reports, which you can see above, their revenue was roughly in line with expectations. They raised expectations for revenue for the next quarter, but if you look at AMD over the past few months, it's been holding pretty remarkably steady at like the $450 to $550 range after running up like 200% earlier in the year. So I think it's clear that there were sky high expectations for AMD given the price action. And I guess this earnings report didn't really meet it. I think short term, the after hours moves were a little crazy, so I nibbled a little bit on this app that I'm using, and I made like $5. I sold it out immediately. It's like a pretty leveraged trade. But I think if you're a long-term investor, AMD is still really attractive for two main reasons. As you may or may not know, AMD's biggest business is CPUs, and their primary competitor is Intel. AMD's CPUs, in terms of price per performance versus Intel CPUs, are ahead like a generation or something versus Intel CPUs. But the real differentiator between their businesses is that Intel manufactures the wafers that they use to create their CPUs, whereas AMD purchases the wafers from TSMC or Taiwan Semi. Additionally, Intel sells their server capacity to other companies like NVIDIA. They just don't sell it AMD because they're, again, rivals in the CPU business. You may have read that Intel has had some historical financial difficulties. The US government invested a bunch of money into Intel, about a year ago because in terms of national security, having a leading edge semiconductor fabrication plant or the technology like onshored is a sort of national security threat. So if you think about it from that perspective, Taiwan Semi needs to ensure they have a durable lead over Intel in terms of process quality. So think about it from Taiwan Semi's perspective. Intel's leading node is catching up to their node. A bunch of other companies like Broadcom and Nvidia are purchasing wafer capacity from Intel because those companies want to dual source their wafers, of course, because it's a supply chain risk. But one of the largest competitors for AI accelerators versus Nvidia and Broadcom is AMD, and they're not able to dual source. So from a national security perspective of Taiwan, it is within their best interest to allocate AMD as many wafers as they can over time. And at the current state of where everything is with the AI build out, every single AI accelerator is at capacity and backlogged in terms of just producing compute. And so allocating AMD more wafers means that they get more revenue and they earn more profit. The second thing to be bullish about for AMD long term is that for inference workloads, AMD is actually competitive. In fact, they may actually be more than competitive versus NVIDIA and ASICs. I'm not a semiconductor person. I don't do systems ML, work as my day job. But the stuff that I read on Twitter, at least, leads me to believe that AMD is at least price performance competitive versus AMD and like Broadcom. Now, historically, and I can speak on this, the reason why AMD has always lagged NVIDIA in terms of adoption for their GPUs and their AI accelerators is because one of the libraries that NVIDIA bundles with NVIDIA GPUs called CUDA is substantially more mature and a much better developer experience than it is working with AMD. AMD's equivalent is called ROCm. But in a world where AI is writing all machine learning code on the low level, like we're interfacing with AI accelerators, like programming on the GPUs, and the agents don't really care about what a pain in the ass it is to use ROCm, and they're willing to like basically chew glass in order to get stuff working, then the software moat that CUDA had and NVIDIA had no longer seems that durable, because really the thing that matters the most at the end of the day is how much price performance you can get eked out of the actual hardware itself, the semiconductors themselves. So in summary, I think that AMD is going to get a lot of business for many years to come, and their offerings are super competitive, especially with how things are sort of shaking out these days. And I guess there's a third, like, sort of minor reason that I don't really think is as big of a deal, but a lot of people on financial Twitter circles seem to think is a big deal, is that with quote unquote agentic workloads, the ratio of CPUs to GPUs in the data center increases, therefore increasing the demand for CPUs and increasing the average sale price per CPU. But I think that logic probably works for actual bottlenecks like memory. I don't really think it really works for CPUs. Yes, the average sale price of CPUs may increase, but that's just generally for all silicon that is running, any sort of logic. The price of everything will increase. And it's not going to be some sort of like exponential increase like we're seeing with DRAM. So if you're a long-term investor, I think if you hold AMD, I think you're going to be pretty happy over time. I would say that because of how choppy the market has been, it is pretty important, at least if you have a lot of money or you're running a little bit of leverage to pay attention to market news. But again, with situational awareness liquidated, I think the coast is largely clear. I would still pay attention to Asian markets, Korean markets, seem to famously run a ton of leverage. So Korea opens at 8 p.m. at Eastern time every day on the weekday. And if you download the app I built, you can actually monitor the prices of these semiconductor equities 24/7, not just on your brokerage app, which only runs in US trading hours. And you can also trade these markets too.